All right, it's 10:05. So I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome everybody to the Kong Community Call. This is a place where Kong community can hang out, see each other's work, ask questions, learn from each other and stuff like that. Today is February 12th, and we have Jason from API Fortress here who's going to talk a little bit about the solution that they built for mocking API calls and why you would want to mock calls, how you use it, and how they used Kong to make this possible. But before we jump into the presentation, I was actually hoping that we could do things a little bit differently and have people unmute and introduce themselves and say hi first. We did this on the first call and I think it was great. So I'd love to learn about who you are and what you do. So I'm gonna start with Hannah since she's right below me. Hannah, say hi.
Great. Hello everyone, I'm Hannah. I'm our marketing coordinator here at Kong. And I'm thrilled to be on the community call and learn more about what y'all are doing.
Awesome. Daniel, do you want to say hi?
Yeah, hi, I'm Daniel. I'm from Germany and I work for Concentric, a service provider in Germany.
Awesome. Alay, do you want to say hi?
Yeah, sure. Hi. It's a bit loud here. I'm looking for a job, and so I have time now learn new things, and that's a good opportunity to find out more about API Fortress.
Awesome, cool. And now we have Bruno. Bruno, can you unmute and say hi? If you don't want to, that's okay too. We'll just skip you. Okay, cool. How about Claudio?
Hey, I'm from Brazil, Claudio Coavia from Brazil. I work as a Kong solution engineer down here for Latin America region.
Hi, Claudia.
Hey, how are you?
And next we've got Colin. Hi, Colin.
Yeah, I work for Kong and do internal tooling from Canada.
Sweet. Dylan? Dylan Baker, do you want to unmute and say hi? If you want, we can also just skip you. All right, cool. Gabe? Gabe, do you want to say hi? Okay. Hisham?
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. Hi, this is Gabe. I'm with API Fortress in product marketing and communication.
Awesome, sweet. Hisham?
Hey, can you hear me? Sorry.
Yeah.
Hey, this is Dylan. I couldn't figure out how to get my phone unmuted a minute ago. I work for a company called Frontdoor and do cloud engineering and architecture.
Cool, awesome. Nice, next we have Hisham.
Hi there, I'm Hisham, I work for Kong. I'm the tech lead for core team.
Sweet. Trevor?
Hey, I'm Trevor Ellerman. I am the SRE in charge of Kong for WeWork.
Nice.
Hi Trevor, it's Hannah.
Hey, Hannah.
Cool. And then Vas?
Hi, this is Vas Edelin, Director of API Automation for API Fortress, and very excited for today's call.
Awesome, I'm really stoked too. And then last but absolutely not least, we have our presenter, Jason. So Jason, you can just introduce yourself and jump right into your slides if you like. I'll stop sharing and you can take over.
Great. Hi guys, my name is Jason Ioannidis. I'm the sales engineering lead at API Fortress. And if you bear with me for just a second, I will get us rolling. So first I'm going to share one of my screens. You should see that same background you saw before because Keynote can be kind of a pain. And I'm going to go ahead and get rolling here. And can everyone see that first slide? You should see something that says API Fortress mock recording with Kong.
Yes, we see it. Thank you.
Fantastic. So as I mentioned, hi, my name is Jason Ioannidis. I'm the sales engineering lead with API Fortress. And today we're going to take a look at how API Fortress utilizes Kong in order to record mock endpoints. So in order to kind of get there, the first thing that we're going to take a look at is what API mocking means and kind of some of the use cases and pitfalls therein. Then we're going to take a look at how Kong helps API Fortress solve a couple of those pitfalls. And then finally, if we have a little bit of time, we might take a brief look at API Fortress. But before we do that, API Fortress would just like to thank Kong for kind of bringing us into a community call and kind of letting us meet the community at large. So thank you so much, Kong. With that being said, let's go ahead and move ahead. So the first question that we're going to want to answer is, what is API mocking? So for anyone who isn't familiar, API mocking is typically creating a simulated endpoint. So we can create simulated versions of either existing or yet to be developed API endpoints. Now, if we create multiple simulated API endpoints, we can then kind of knit these together into fully realized mock environments. So we can simulate entire systems, entire architectures. And then we can take those kind of mock architectures or mock endpoints and expose them and make them accessible to the rest of our team. And just to kind of give you an idea of what that looks like in API Fortress, this is a screenshot of our mocking system, which we'll be taking a closer look at a little later in the presentation. So now we know what mocking is. I guess the next logical question that we should answer is, why should we mock, right? So the first kind of big thing that we see in terms of use cases for mocking is that when we're talking about staging environments and dev environments, and as a testing platform we most frequently are, some APIs are not available in internal environments. Now, this can relate to attempting to do things like integration testing from an API perspective, where if we don't have access to those API endpoints in those developer environments, then we'll have a lot of trouble actually fully realizing those integration workflows. And that's kind of what we're talking about here. So test environments may not be able to reach integrated external APIs. Another kind of popular use case that we see somewhat frequently is that some API endpoints have what we refer to as a cost per click. So if the team is integrating with a service that costs actual money in order to hit, when you're in that kind of development phase, you don't necessarily want to be spending money on hitting those endpoints. So a viable solution in some cases is to mock that endpoint. So I think kind of the classic example that we use is something like the LexisNexis API. Where if you're referring to the LexisNexis API, there is a substantial cost per click there, which can stack up very quickly if you're running, lots of smoke tests, lots of integration tests, things like that. So by mocking that sort of endpoint and kind of using more static responses, you can do meaningful integration testing without incurring that sort of cost. And then kind of the third, and I guess completing the triumvirate of popular use cases that we see, would be just that some internal services are not ready yet. So in the age of microservice architecture, we frequently see one team working on microservice A and another team working on microservice B. And sometimes versions get out of sync in terms of development. And microservice A may need to refer to microservice B, which has not completed an incoming update or something of that nature. So in order to kind of solve that problem, team A can mock the expected response of team B and complete their integration testing as they go. So now we know the what and the why. What are some of the problems with mocking? So there are a number of, I suppose not necessarily problems, but issues that we may face when we're trying to create kind of a meaningful mock environment. And the first one is kind of the issue of localization versus kind of a cloud-based solution. So localized mocking is not necessarily collaborative. So the endpoints are only going to be available on the machine hosting the actual mock server. And unless that service is exposed, they will only be available to that specific machine. Another kind of pitfall that we've faced, and this is specifically what Kong has done a lot to kind of help us solve, is the fact that the manual creation of mock endpoints can be extremely time consuming. So creating kind of a simple JSON object is very straightforward. We're going to look at that in just a moment. But creating more kind of complex, kind of closer to the real world mock responses can actually be quite difficult. So I guess the next logical question would be, how does Kong fit into this equation? API Fortress uses Kong to proxy API endpoints, record those endpoints as mock endpoints, switch between mock and live responses, which we're not going to actually look at in the demo today, but is a feature that we have. and log API traffic, both with the mock endpoints, and we actually do leverage Kong in another part of the platform to log live API traffic. So in terms of our workflow, we're going to start with an endpoint to be mocked. So this is ultimately what we want to record as our mock. And we're going to pass that through Kong, and in doing so, create a proxy version of that endpoint. So that'll wind us up with our proxy version of the endpoint. And then we're going to send a request to that proxied endpoint. And as the response passes back through Kong, we're actually going to wind up using a plugin that API Fortress provides for Kong, wind up recording that mock, passing it into the API Fortress platform, and over time, by repeating this process, we're going to wind up with a complete mock environment in a lot less time than it would actually take us to manually make the individual calls and then kind of copy and paste over the actual results, plus the headers, plus any number of other things that may be required. In terms of a technical diagram, to kind of rehash what we just spoke about in that workflow that we just looked at, here's API Fortress kind of living in the box that it lives in, right in the middle. And we have our HTTP client over to the left. So this could be anything from curl to HTTP to any other number of systems that can allow us to send HTTP requests. And we're going to send those requests through Kong. We're going to proxy endpoints so proxy the actual target that we're looking at. And as the response passes back through Kong from the proxied endpoint, we're going to send that information to API Fortress, where it will be saved in API Fortress's mocking database as a mock endpoint. So that's all well and good in terms of theory, but I think will really start to kind of make sense once we jump into the demonstration. But before we do that, as this is a community call, I wanted to pause and see if there were any kind of questions on anything we've touched on so far.
Anyone who has a question can feel free to unmute, and I'm also going to keep an eye on the chat.
Oh, thank you so much. Okay. It sounds like there aren't any questions, so let's kind of dive into the practical. I'm going to stop my share for a moment. I'm going to switch up my screens and jump right back into the share, so bear with me for just one moment.
While we're hanging out, waiting for the switchover, if anybody wants to help out by taking notes in the agenda doc, it would be much appreciated. I intended to set a designated note taker at the beginning of the call, and I totally forgot. Well, we can also take notes on our end, but if anybody wants to do it, feel free to jump right in.
Great. So can everyone see my screen again?
Yes, we can.
Okay, terrific. So what we're looking at here is the API Fortress mocking interface. So this is where we can create our mock endpoints, view our mock endpoints, and grab the links for our mock endpoints. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of create a very simple demonstration mock endpoint. So I'm going to call it demo, and our route is going to be /API/Kong. This is a locally running instance, so everything's based out of the host file. So if I mess up a host name, that's why. So we have this path here, right? And if we want to create a base response case, we can do so by adding a response case. We select our method, our status code, and then I'm just going to put in Kong demonstration as my response body. I'm going to save my changes. And since this is a get, I can just hit it through the browser. So I'm going to grab my URL, open a new tab, drop it in. And you might be having trouble seeing this because this is a very big screen. But up here in the corner, we see Kong demonstration. So I've created a mock, right? But this is not really what I'd refer to as a meaningful mock. And it's a super simple example. And thanks to Kong, we're able to kind of create much more meaningful mocks in about as much time. And we're going to do exactly that right now. So the interface for API Fortress mock recording is this. It's actually performed mostly through the command line. We're going to pass 3 specific command line kind of requests. And then we will, as we pass each one, we'll kind of discuss what each one is doing with both API Fortress and Kong. So I'm going to pass in my first request here. Sorry, I'm doing a bad job of copy pasting. Okay, so we're using curl for the purposes of this demonstration, or we're going to switch between curl and HTTP. HTTP will be when we actually need to see a response. So we're sending a post request with some data in it, right? So the upstream URL is demoapi.apifortress.com, and that's the demonstration API that API Fortress hosts on its servers. And we're hosting it through Kong as proxy-demoapi.apif.jco.com, which is my locally mounted instance of API Fortress. That's actually getting sent to the instance itself, and 8001 is where Kong is currently listening. So Kong has become, in this situation, a part of our microservice architecture, acting as a gateway. So I'm going to hit enter, and we get a whole bunch of output here. The important output that I need is actually this ID right here. So I'm going to copy this ID, and I'm going to paste it into the next request that we're going to send in. And then I'm going to throw that request in. This one's a little bit more complicated. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to clear the screen first.
Jason, what was that the ID of?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. So what that ID specifically refers to, you know what, that's a great question, and I can give you a better answer than actually explaining it like that. I'm actually going to make another call to an endpoint that will reveal all of the endpoints that we currently have proxied. So the ID, to answer your question in a shorter way, that ID is the ID of the proxy route that we just created in Kong.
Okay.
So we're going to go ahead and take a look at all of those currently. So here we go. So I just sent a request to the Kong instance asking it for a list of all the currently existent proxies. So before we started this demo, I went ahead and cleared everything out. So here we have this proxy route. We can see its upstream URL is demoapi.apifortress.com. The host is proxy demoapi.apif.jco.com. So that's how I can actually hit this proxy route. The name, which is literally just like a canonical name, is demo API. And the ID is this hash here. So I'm going to grab this hash. I'm going to paste it into another call. And what this call is actually specifically designed to do is to tell the Kong proxy to turn on the API Fortress extension, or plugin rather, for this specific route. So basically, we're going to turn this from a regular proxy route into a proxy route that is able to record for API Fortress mocking. Does that answer your question?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Great. Sorry. And great question, by the way. Super important. Okay, bear with me for 1 sec. Let's grab this ID. Let's copy it. Let's drop it into our route here. Okay. So I'm going to throw this into a curl request. Okay, so there's a lot going on here, but what really bears mentioning is that this specific API call is going to allow us to turn on that Fortress HTTP log extension, which is going to ultimately allow us to send requests to that proxy and have them be recorded. Sorry, yep, that's the right one. Okay, great. So let's go ahead and hit enter. So the response we've gotten here is essentially stating that the HTTP log plugin, I keep calling it an extension, plugin for this specific proxy route has been activated. Now, the only thing that remains to do is to send a properly formatted request to the proxy route itself. In doing so, the Kong gateway will kind of capture the request and response and push those into API Fortress mocking. And kind of how meaningful that is will become apparent in a moment. Because we saw how long it kind of took us to kind of write that very basic mock API response. But with Kong involved in the situation, and this is just a call to that proxy route via port 8000, so to the actual Kong gateway. And I have some routing on the end here. So I'm making an all products call from the demo API that we proxied, and I'm sending a header with it, which is the expected API key of the demo API. I'm doing this with HTTP just so we can kind of see a more colorful response. So I'm going to hit enter. And here's our response. So this is the actual response body that we expect, and this is the response of the actual proxy itself. But now if we jump over to API Fortress mocking, we actually have this proxy route now pushed in as a mock. And if I click into this, our routing is also separated out intelligently. And I've got my full response body here. So if I actually grab this route and throw it into a new tab, because it's a GET request, I actually have a fully realized mock of this specific route. And this is super exciting because it means we can stand up really meaningful kind of mock API endpoints in very short order. And to kind of drive that point home, let's go ahead and create a couple more, essentially with the same route. So I know that my product endpoint has individual products in it too. So those are routed by adding IDs onto the end of each call. So I'm going to go ahead and hit number 1. Let's hit number 2. And then let's hit number 5. So now we've made those other calls and we're throwing those through that proxied route. If we go back over to API Fortress and we refresh the page and jump back into this route, I now have 1, 2, and 5 all recorded as mocks successfully. And this is all, at this point, effectively automated by the platform. And I can hit any of these mocks. And more importantly, anyone who's in my, my server environment where API Fortress is deployed as an on-premises product is also able to hit any of these mock endpoints. So this is true of both API-based kind of responses, but technically, while that is the specific use case for it, you could do this with entire web pages. As long as they're being served over HTTP, mock recording with API Fortress and Kong is actually capable of standing up mock instances of those web pages in local environments and things like that. So Kong, in short, has allowed us to make the process very simple, very effective, and super, super useful. So does anyone have any questions? I would imagine there have to be a couple.
So I have a question.
Sure.
What is the plugin actually doing? Is it just taking that response body and pushing it to API Fortress, or does it have some internal like logging or something that it does itself before it gets to your platform?
That's actually, it's a really great question, because the plugin is doing a number of things in this case. So you're right insofar, you're actually right in both cases, both your specific and your hypothetical, because the plugin is, yes, what's actually pushing to API Fortress, but it's also doing some logging for us. So if we can open a logger, and Kong is also handling this functionality for us as well, where it's logging all of the calls that are made to these mocks. So we can see all the specific data here. So it's doing both of those things at the same time. So we've actually found it to be a super effective tool in both of those regards.
Awesome.
Any other questions? Ooh, there looks like there's something in the chat, maybe?
Is there something in the chat room? Yes, here we go. Ale says, do you
have any predefined mocks for external services? So kind of out of the box predefined mocks, is that kind of what you're referring to? Like, do we provide kind of boilerplate?
Yeah, I mean, I guess you mentioned that there is a pain point with integrating to external services in terms of maybe in terms of the money. However, I think like any of those services should have like some test environment which you could integrate with, but at the same time, the endpoints usually, they don't change much. So you might have some have a predefined like integration mocks for those services.
I understand what you're saying. We kind of provide those on a case by case. So when we're doing deployments, if somebody has kind of a need or a use case for a specifically kind of designed mock environment, that's something that we can do kind of pre-deployment for them. We don't really provide any sort of like boilerplate mock responses, but that's actually a fairly good point. And if it's all right with you, I'm actually going to take that back to my team because that's a pretty solid idea. Any other questions that I can answer?
All right.
Okay, great.
Good for now.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of the long and the short of the integration between API Fortress and Kong. So absent of any other questions, I guess, Judith, I would hand it back to you if that's all right.
Yeah, I was going to actually ask you about your experience building the plugin itself and building the platform. Like, were there things about Kong when you were trying to build the integration that could have been better, or Like, did you have a pretty easy time? Did you take a look at the plugin development kit and stuff about kind of your process around that?
So from personal perspective, I do development work for API Fortress, but this specific plugin was actually handled by somebody else on our team. Now I am involved in kind of the follow-on to that. So what we're actually looking at doing is kind of extending this functionality a little bit with command line tooling. So as you guys could see, we're kind of sending naked HTTP requests at current to the proxy, and we're going to try and wrap that up in a command line tool to kind of make that a little neater. But in general, the development process was actually very friendly, at least as far as I'm aware and kind of was involved with it. But the development process and the tool itself has been very, it kind of checks all our boxes. It's a powerful tool that's very easy to integrate with.
Did you look at other API gateways while you were architecting this thing?
We did, and there were a number of issues with some of the other kind of ways we were looking at going, and we have integrations out there, so I can't really specifically name names.
Yeah, that's fine.
Kong kind of provided us with a really nice confluence of both functional and lightweight that made it kind of the perfect kind of integration for this specific purpose.
Awesome. That's awesome. Cool. Last call for questions. All right, cool. So now I had on the agenda an open agenda section, which is basically just if anybody wants to talk about anything or bring anything up, has any questions about how Kong development is going, the Kong 1.0 patch releases or anything like that, feel free to either unmute or chat them in. And if we don't get anything, we can give everybody a chunk of time back.
Sure, I'm curious about the patch releases.
Awesome. What do you want to know about the patch releases?
What's the story behind them? What happened?
What was that?
What's the story behind them? I'm just curious.
Oh yeah, Hisham, go for it.
Yeah, I can fill that in. Yeah, they are. Hi there. So the patch releases are part of our normal development cycle because 1.0 has been a big release. Oh, well, light here. It's really. Anyways, so 1.0 was a huge release with lots of new stuff. So we had a longer release candidate process with that, and once that was released by the end of the year, being a major release, you do get somewhat of a gradual adoption to that, and so now we're starting seeing the adoption for 1.0 from people who are upgrading, and because being a major release, a lot of the deprecated concepts that had been marked as deprecated for a long time, they have been found and removed. But of course, some people keep using the deprecated stuff up until the very last minute. So for that reason, the adoption is gradual, and that was totally expected. But as we get more feedback, like it's normal that the patch releases keep coming as we are like ironing out like the rough edges and things like that. So the patch releases are essentially for stability only. We are using semantic versioning. So any release like 1.0.x, it does not introduce any like breaking changes or incompatible features. So they should all be like a drop-in replacement, and they have no migrations either. And so it's a very smooth transition. So it's essentially that it's bug fixes while in parallel we keep our work going on 1.1, which is the next like minor release in the sequence, which will introduce new features but still not break any of the stuff that was introduced in 1.0.
Sweet, thanks. I am exactly one of those customers. Inherited deprecated APIs and then working on upgrading to Kong 1. I do have another question. Just any more insights recently on gRPC support in Kong in 1.1 or coming soon?
Yeah, go for it, Hisham.
Does anyone else want to comment on that? yeah, well, what I can say is that yeah, we have that on the radar, and at the same time, like that's like that depends on lots of components. So like the support from the stack that we're built in, and but oftentimes the stack that we are built up on has progressed because of us, because like essentially like we are sponsoring the development of some components and things like that. So yeah, that we have that on the radar, but that depends of course on like customer demand and all those various factors. But yeah, I guess.
Yeah, it's definitely on the list of things we plan to get to, but when we plan to get to it is still TBD.
Exactly.
Sweet, thanks.
Jeremy has a question, which is, how does the declarative config dblist, how goes the declarative config, which is dblist Kong? Is that on the 1.1 roadmap? And will the Bungle router plugin map rebuild logic be making an appearance in core?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Right. So those two great questions from someone who's very much in tune with what's going on in our GitHub repos. So yes, we are hard at work with the declarative config stuff. Some PRs have already popped up, and yes, that's that it's like in the immediate horizon. So we had like we made the RFC messages there to get some community feedback on that. I still well, I've been hard at work coding. I haven't like gotten around to get back to actually like replying to all of the feedback we got, but the feedback was very much appreciated. So yeah, that's a sign that this is definitely coming. The support for declarative config and using it like both as a way to import stuff and running on dblist mode. Like there, like if you peek at our branches in the live repo and open source, you'll see that there's ongoing work on that. Regarding the second question, whether the work that Bungle, like Mr. Bungle, which is our core developer,
Yeah.
Apo Talvenzari.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, many of us in core we have been working towards like router improvements. I know that Pop Rocks has also sent some stuff. Chibo has sent some stuff. Apple has sent some stuff. And since this is like super critical, I think we all need to sit down and like decide a path forward for that. And like exactly like which of the bits and pieces are going to be merged into core. Jeremy, your feedback on this stuff has been like super precious for to help us get a clear picture of the impact of those changes. So yeah, so at one point, really, I believe like some of those improvements will make their way in. Yeah.
Cool. Glad to hear it. Thanks for the updates.
Yeah. Thank you.
Oh, totally different topic. Is there a Kong Summit planned for this year? There is. We are in the planning stages now. We're going to put out a formal CFP, I think, in a couple of months, and we would love it if you guys all submitted awesome talks. We're really excited about it. We don't have the date locked down yet. I believe we're looking at the fall, and we will definitely keep you posted. I'm really stoked about it.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, this is Dylan. I've got kind of a technical question if we're game for that sort of thing.
Sure. I mean, I'm volunteering to be on here, but yes.
Sure. So I have been, for the most part, happily using the Kong ingress controller recently. It's a very cool thing to use. But so the first question is that, well, we're running into some issues where when we configure our backend services to be HTTP services, it appears that somewhere in between the actual registration of the ingresses and actually writing those to or calling the Kong API from the ingress controller, those services are getting defaulted or getting default values of HTTP and 80. And so I can't figure out exactly what's going on or why it's defaulting to those. So I'd like to rebuild the ingress controller image, and I've been looking at y'all's Docker files on your GitHub, and I can see that in the ingress controller base image, it references a base image that's actually named base image. And I'm just wondering if there are any specific build requirements for that, or if it's just kind of a fairly straightforward Go application. I'm just starting to get into that. So I might be able to answer some of these myself, but I figured I'd ask anybody here that might know. Did anybody catch what I was saying?
Yeah, no, we got it. I don't actually know the answer to those. And Harry, who you're probably used to having answer all of your questions about the ingress controller, has been in India for like 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month. But he's getting back like tomorrow, I think, which we're all super excited about. So I've been seeing your questions come through, and I'm like, oh, I don't want to take a guess because I know that Harry's going to come back and I'll probably not be correct.
All right.
But I do think that,
I figured I'd go ahead.
Yeah, I do think that it's a pretty standard Go application ? And if you're getting your things reconfigured, you might, oh, Colin is raising his hand. Colin, do you know something about this? Am I guessing wrong?
I don't know a lot about it, but I think if you inspect the makefile, so you're in Kubernetes ingress controller repository, right?
Yep, and the makefile has, I'm browsing to it right now. I saw that it had some phony entries, which I'm not super familiar with what that is.
So
go ahead.
Line 55, I think, is what you're looking for, where the base image default is just a Google container, Debian base, and then the architecture.
Okay. Thank you so much. That helps. And so I don't know if anyone else has run into this where the backend defaults to HTTP. And I don't think it's, you know, as I've been using the ingress controller, it's really pretty cool because like if you upload a certificate to Kubernetes and you go check the certificate's data store in Postgres or Cassandra, whichever you use, it actually automatically imports all those. It's really cool how this thing works. But anyways, I'm not sure where I was going with that, but that will help me with being able. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and change the default values for services to be 443 and HTTPS, and I think that'll fix our problem for us. But I don't know how many people are using the ingress controller in Kubernetes, but I would imagine that other people would be having this issue, but maybe they're not. I don't know. But thank you. That helps.
Yeah, I know it's a newer kind of way to utilize Kong, but it is getting picked up. We do see a more chatter about it in other Slack channels. Like I know there's a Kong channel on HangOps and a Kong channel in Kubernetes, and a lot of the questions I see in there are related to Ingress and, well, Kubernetes, obviously. So.
Oh, awesome! I'll join that Kong Slack channel right now. That's super helpful.
Yeah, definitely. The other thing is that are you using if you're using a mix of CRDs and hitting the admin API for configurations, that can cause problems sometimes. So only use one. And
yeah, that's what I've been. And so if you use the admin API, the Kubernetes ingress will actually overwrite the values that you put in there since it's looking for the state declarator. So I think, but thank you for that. But I think I'm doing that.
Okay.
I appreciate it.
Thank you, Colin.
Yeah, thanks.
Any other questions? All right. So I think we're going to give everybody 15 minutes back. Have a great month. If you are interested in presenting some work on the community call, anything you've done with Kong or a plugin you built or I don't know, a project that you're proud of, please let us know. We're always looking for presenters and we'll see you next month. I think the next call will be on March 12th, I believe. It's the second Tuesday of the month. Talk to you later. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. See you.
Bye.